Michael Costa, the Morrison government's humiliation today, trying to reward a supporter of Deputy Prime Minister Malcolm McCormack by making him Deputy Speaker, but then getting beaten in a secret vote when Labor and some Nationals vote instead for a rebel, Lou O'Brien, who'd quit the Nationals party room just this morning. How serious do you call this?
Well, it's certainly embarrassing, Andrew. I mean, I don't think you can, spin it any other way to say that it's actually a very embarrassing event for the government. The problem I have with all this, other than the fact that there's this internal issue about who got positions, I don't know what the policy differences that make this an issue of principle. I think it's very self-indulgent on the part of the Nationals. I think it's going to cause them all sorts of difficulties in terms of getting the Morrison government getting back onto a proper agenda, and for what end? I mean, the point is that we don't understand what are the underlying policy differences that would justify this sort of action. But certainly it's embarrassing, and it's the last thing that Morrison needs at the moment, given that he really does need to carve out an agenda that cuts through, because at the moment they're struggling.
Yeah, I think a coal-fired power station might turn out to be on the agenda, one for Queensland. Now, Brian said he hadn't even thought of running for the Deputy Speaker job until Labor suggested it in Parliament just a second or two earlier. And this is more concerning to your point, Michael, he didn't rule out voting against the government on other issues either. Here he is. Have a listen.
Did you know Labor were going to nominate you?
No.
So you were out of the chamber, you came back in, and at that moment you decided to accept the nomination?
Something like that.
Okay, so, I mean, how do you feel? Because Michael McCormack obviously wanted Damien Drummond the job, but how do you feel about taking that on?
Well, it's a democratic process. Michael McCormack is the leader of the National Party. I am a member of the LNP sitting in the government, so I'm not a member of Michael McCormack's party.
Do you think you'll be crossing the floor on legislation?
Look, I consider legislation, all legislation, when it comes before me. The people of Wide Bay have sent me here to do the right thing by them.
Michael Kroger, this could be very destabilising for the government.
Well, I think so, Andrew. Although I'm not sure federal Liberals can lecture the National Party about stability. I think over the last 50 years, the National Party's stability has been a lot better than ours. But moving on, yeah, this is obviously very serious, what he just said then. I mean, you've got Morrison's got a two-seat majority. It's 76 against 74, the Speaker not voting. So 2 votes go the other way. You're going to lose legislation. So is this going to be a difficult period to navigate? It certainly looks like that way, Andrew.
And how to fix it? By making Barnaby Joyce the Nationals leader instead? And then you're going to get other disaffected.
Well, I don't, clearly he doesn't have the numbers in the party room. So my sense is it wasn't 11-10. I mean, we wouldn't know. But 5 people voted for, it looks like 5 people, could have been 6, but it looks like 5 National Party members only voted for O'Brien to be Deputy Speaker. If there were more, if there was 10 that voted for Joyce, you might have had a few more than 5. So you don't know, but my sense is that it wasn't 11-10.
Okay. We heard from Malcolm Turnbull today, Michael Costa, blasting people like Matt Canavan as nuts for pushing the coal-fired power station, getting involved in the argy-bargy. Canavan fired back at him today. But it's also another Turnbull's under some fire today. Alex Turnbull at the last election campaigned against the Liberal government, backing independent Julia Banks, an ally of his father, against an enemy of his father, Greg Hunt. She lost badly, hooray. And he also backed global warming campaigner Anthony Pesich. Now, Alex Turnbull told Sydney Morning Herald columnist Peter Fitzsimons he was tipping in a 6-figure donation to these campaigns, at least $100,000. Campaign funding disclosures show he donated just $20,000, all to Pesich. What is the story here?
Andrew, I don't know what the story is, and does anybody really care? I think the best thing that can happen for the Australian political scene is to ignore the Turnbulls, both senior and junior, and focus on the policies. And I think that's where we've got to focus with Malcolm Turnbull. This policy on opposing any new coal-fired plants is just really crazy, because what they don't tell you is they're not just opposed to coal, they're opposed to all fossil fuels. So the next thing in the line is transport, agriculture. We need to have a rational debate about precisely what they're talking about. Coal-powered power stations are the symbol But the reality is their policies go deeper than that. They mean a fundamental change to the whole economy, and no explanation in what's to replace that and the effects on the broader economy. So I think we should focus on Malcolm Turnbull more than his son. His policies are bonkers. He's not longer in politics, and that's precisely the reason why. And
Exactly.
the policies are dangerous.
Now, Michael Costa is not impressed by Alex Turnbull. The media was before the election. He couldn't, you know, write half a tweet without newspapers being full of it. Now he's made his tweets private after these latest revelations, so I don't know what the truth of them is. Are you interested in Alex Turnbull?
Well, he attacked me some months ago, so I am interested in him. But look, you know, I'll tell you something interesting, that he said he's given 100 and he's disclosed 20. The AEC website and the disclosure regime means that he may not have to disclose anything. It's not the cumulative amount of the 100,000. So the AEC website says, and you say the threshold was 13,500, changes every year because of inflation. If it was 13,500, the AEC website says if you gave a donation to one party of 12,000 and one to another party of 16,000, only the 16 has to be disclosed, because the 12 is under the threshold and it's to a different party. So if he gave 10,000 each to 10 unrelated candidates, it probably means he doesn't have to disclose anything.
Do they?
Do they what?
Do they have to disclose?
They probably have to disclose where they've got...
But so far, it doesn't seem many are disclosing.
Well, usually a political party will disclose donations over the threshold and not all the individual donations. But it may well be the case that he doesn't have to disclose where his 100,000 went, and if that's the case, that's a serious loophole in the legislation.
Well, that is a good point. Either that or perhaps Peter Fitzsimons shouldn't trust everything that Alex Turnbull tells him, and which Peter Fitzsimons then sticks in his column. I'd probably suspect a correction is in order, Peter Fitzsimons. Michael Costa, Prime Minister Scott Morrison made Ida Buttrose the chairman of the ABC. I warned at the time I didn't think she had the energy for it. He expected her to, apparently to clean up its bias. She hasn't done that. Big surprise. Instead, she's going to this week reportedly meet Scott Morrison to ask for even more money for the ABC, which already gets $1 billion a year. Now, my question to you, Michael Costa, is exactly what does she want that money for? Is it to make more episodes of Q&A in which there's a single Liberal who gets heckled and jeered? Is it to make more Media Watch shows that preach global warming and tell untruths and stretch the truths about Sky News? Or is it to make more insiders shows like the one yesterday where not a single host, not a single panellist, not a single guest is a Conservative?
Well, Andrew, look, we know we've got a fundamental problem with the ABC, and the problem with expecting it to change by changing the chairperson is, I think, flawed with all sorts of dangers. You end up with Stockholm syndrome, that the person they appoint ends up being captured and, you know, starting to preach the very same gospel. I think what needs to happen here is a proper review of the functions of the ABC, and I mean, you know, not just its political bias. We all agree that's there. The fundamental question is of what market failure is this trying to deal with, this ABC? I've said on many occasions that I strongly support the sort of regional network, the emergency service network, and I think there's justification for publicly funding that. The rest of it, you know, in this day and age should be a subscription service. You know, if people want to pay to watch those sorts of programs, let them pay like everybody else does. I mean, Netflix and Stan and all the other, you know, Fox and all those other services are now paid for, and it's an accepted model. There certainly isn't any political diversity that's enhanced by the ABC. I mean, you've got The Guardian and most of the mainstream media is left-wing anyhow. So you really need to look at the fundamentals here rather than expecting one individual not to be captured by the bureaucracy in there.
Yes, if the ABC can't be unbiased, then let it be smaller and less of a menace to democracy. So I'd say no to the any funding cut. Boris Johnson, picking up on what Michael Costa just said, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of Britain, has said to the ABC, I'm thinking of putting you in a subscription service too, because indeed there's a plethora of new media around. Why do you need a state broadcaster, and particularly why does the Conservative government need one that's just absolutely dominated by the left despite its statutory duty to be impartial?
And they put 51 people in jail in Britain for not paying their BBC subscription fee, by the way. But listen, if Ida came to me and I was Scott Morrison, I'd say, Ida, here are three things. First of all, we're going to undertake, the government is going to undertake an efficiency review to see if you need more money.
So many of those reviews.
Secondly, a reach review, so you can actually tell the public how far is this behemoth of the ABC going to reach into the commercial media world where the ABC presence is not particularly necessary. But most importantly, I'd say, Ida, we're going to conduct an independent review of your adherence, the adherence of the board to Section 8 of the ABC Act, which requires the presentation of news and information to be impartial. The ABC can't do that. I was on the board when I had all these reviews come in and they all just say, oh, how fantastic the ABC is. The government needs to commission a review of the ABC bias and its lack of impartiality, because that is a breach of a statutory duty. And until somebody independent does that review, Andrew, we're going to keep being embarrassed by the bias of the ABC.
No, I totally agree with you, and I'd pick up on Michael Costa's point. Why are we funding 4 national TV stations of the ABC? One should do. Why are we funding 5 national radio stations for the ABC? I think 1, maybe 2 at most will do, plus the country ones. This is just ridiculous. And why are we funding the ABC to run an online newspaper? There's plenty of newspapers out there.
Correct.
And their ratings are going down, Andrew. I mean, nobody's watching them. What 8 out of 10 people don't watch the ABC or listen to it. It's, you know.
Well, Michael Costa, just quickly before we go, I think it's a bit sad. Celebrity chef George Calombaris, MasterChef star, his empire has crashed, the restaurant empire, placed into voluntary administration this afternoon. That's 400 jobs possibly gone, 12 venues perhaps closed. Look, he underpaid staff, got caught out, he said it was a mistake, a huge pile-on, fines, etc., etc. I just wonder whether his critics should think back, you know, job done, yeah, 400 people out of work.
Well, Andrew, I think everybody's sad for the fact that 400 people are out of work, but I don't think the two issues are related. I mean, he did underpay his staff, and there are consequences to that. I think a section of the public decided in the marketplace not to frequent his establishments, from what I can gather. And, you know, that was the decision that was made. Hopefully he can resurrect himself as an individual, but...
yeah,
you know,
I think it's given a lot of pleasure to a lot of people. His recipe for moussaka is the best I've ever done, personal favourite. Michael Kroger, Michael Costa, thank you both so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.